Hey everyone, Zero X Wing from runebase.org here, and you're listening to the runebase.org podcast. On this podcast, we explore THORChain, the THORChain ecosystem, and the world of decentralized finance around it. Thank you so much for listening. On today's podcast, I have the pleasure of speaking with Archon. Archon is one of my contemporaries in Qi Captial, and he is also the host of the Qi Captial podcast and writes at the Qi Captial blog. And I've appreciated his voice on both the podcast and on crypto Twitter for some time now, and so it was a pleasure to get to know him. On this show, we talked about his story, his background, how he got involved in THORChain, and then we started talking about getting involved in crypto. Beyond just investing, how can you get involved in these projects and actually build something, grow something, and learn and help actually create value for the ecosystem and for the projects that you're getting involved in. We talked about the work that he's doing specifically, so his podcast and his writing, and then we talk a bit about the Terra ecosystem and stablecoins, and we even touch on some global geo macro nerding out. So had a lot of fun with this one. Archon, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate you, buddy. And everybody, thank you so much for listening as always. And if you want more, check out the Runebase podcast. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts or at runebase.org or YouTube, Runebase. Thank you so much. See you on the inside. Peace. Hello, everyone. Zero X Wing from Runebase here, and today I'm happy to be joined by Archon. He's one of my contemporaries in Qi Captial, the chief farming officer, if you will, and also the host of the Qi Captial podcast alongside our friend, the Thor lady. Archon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. After just a few hours, I think probably after you had Johnny from Qi on the show.
Yeah, we got to get the whole gang on the pod, you know, like it's the community. It's great to have you. And I've been a fan of following along with your insights on Twitter and the THORChain ecosystem, as many I'm sure who have listening have. And also really appreciate the work that you and the Thor lady are doing with the Qi podcast. So thank you for everything you're doing. I'll start with that.
Thank you for listening in.
Absolutely. And so we'll touch on a few things here today. You and I chatted a little bit before the show, and we have some ideas of what we'll want to touch on here. And we'll start with your backstory. We'll get into crypto, Qi Captial, THORChain, the THORChain ecosystem. But let's start with, getting to know you a bit. What's your backstory, like your background and how you got into crypto and DeFi?
So my backstory, especially in the last years, I've been working as a product manager, so originally product owner, working with some agile development teams directly. And then over the last years, progressed more into a strategic role. So being strategic product manager, portfolio manager. And I think it's also important to understand like my perspective on the market. I'm not that technical as the coleslaw, not that financially literate as coleslaw, for example, that you also had on the show. My perspective is mostly like product market fit, problem solution fit, like adoption curve of projects and the team behind. So this is how I actually view the market and also base my investments decisions on. In terms of the crypto journey, I think it was a very typical one and one that taught me a lot of interesting learnings. And I think one that also helps us to better understand how new people now join the space. Like the first time I was exposed to Bitcoin was probably 2015, 2016, just used it for some transactions, legal transactions, obviously, on the internet, and really just used it, but I was really busy with other stuff and didn't really look into it. So didn't really understand the backstory and let go of it. And then a few years later, obviously, it caught me again when the big hype happened in 2017. And I digged in a bit deeper into it, but for me, it was still like a bubble. And why now buy in at 10K, 20K? It's not interesting. But still, I found the topic interesting and then spent a few weeks, months understanding better the concepts behind it. Like April, May 2018, things got really downwards in the market. And then for me, this was then an opportunity to get into investing into stuff.
Let me actually stop and ask you there. The bull market happened October, November, December 2017, and the crash was January. You're talking about like spring 2018. A lot of people looking at that huge crash don't have the conviction to go in to something that had just crashed 50, 60, 70%. What gave you that conviction that early on that now was the time to invest?
Yeah, I mean, as mentioned before, I try always to look at the fundamentals and did they really change between what happened like in late 2017 and early 2018? For me, even back then, it was a lot of FUD around the topic and like this was an expected correction that happened that also happens in the stock market, like 20, 30% can happen, even more during the big crisis. And so the minus 50% didn't really scare me off that much. And in the end, it got down much further afterwards. But for me, I smelled the opportunity. I mean, it's still even true, like buy when there's blood on the street. And there was quite a lot of blood back then, even more blood later on.
It was a painful ride for those of us that rode the roller coaster up, at least.
Yeah, if I would have known what I would have expected over the next 2 or 3 years during like the crypto winter, I probably wouldn't have bought in back then. But still, I mean, in the end, it was learned a lot. And I think people that now go into the market and didn't experience this long-lasting bear market, for them, it's very different situation. I heard from many that lost really quite a lot because that things couldn't go down massively. And we experienced right now just crashes of 70, 80%.
I might have derailed you from your original line, though. So you're talking about mid-2018, you start buying, trading, investing again.
Yeah, exactly. So I was screening the market and things that really hit me back then, and people will probably hate me now for it, but it was XRP, for example. Yeah. Because like for me, it was interesting was how can this be used? Cryptocurrencies. Yeah. It needs to be fast. It needs to be low fees. And back then they did the story of like making those remittances easier and have a settlement currency between different fiat currencies. Really hit me. And then I got into this community and spent a lot of time on Reddit and so on and so forth. And yeah, I was quite convicted back then. And only after a few months, it was 2019 even, of course, I was invested in a few other projects, but then I realized, okay, things are really off here, yeah, because I got more and more into the what's decentralization really about, and there's really a huge lack of decentralization in XRP, and also the lost connection completely between Ripple and community, and all the ecosystem projects didn't really take off. And yeah, then for me it was clear, okay, that's the wrong train I'm sitting on. And then what is cryptocurrency really about? And then I got more into the DeFi sector, and I've always been into Ethereum, even like in 2018 back then, and that's what was where my focus was on. And I got more into a DeFi, like the now blue chip projects like Aave and Synthetics, Compound, all of these, and I actually tried everything out that's in the market back then. So my Deegan score went pretty high back then. And this is how I completely changed what I wanted to invest in and what I want to use and try, and later on also help to build. And this was very important learning for me, is that you can let go of something, yeah? Not be completely biased by a community that has obviously a high interest of being in their own bubble and then spinning their narrative, and to get an outside view and being able to change.
And becoming dogmatic. Yeah, and that's something I talked about with Johnny. I look at what's happening with like the toxic maximalism in the Bitcoin community sometimes, and how foolish it is and how closed-minded it is. And I use that as a reminder to check myself occasionally on how I am with THORChain. I'm so excited about THORChain. I have so much conviction and belief around it, and I'm so exposed to it both with my investments, but also everything I'm building here, and this podcast and runebase.org and my crypto Twitter persona. And when people say, what about AnySwap? What about SIFChain? I've worked to remind myself that it's not a winner take all, that it's a huge opportunity with rooms from multiple players. And it helps that we see this attitude coming from the very top, coming from the THORChain team themselves and the THORChain Twitter account. They're very supportive and collaborative with other would-be ecosystem competitors. They don't have like a toxic competitive mindset. And so that helps to kind of take the edge off of what otherwise would be a very competitive mindset. I want to ask you, so first off, this is funny. Johnny also said that he started in the Ripple XRP community. Did you connect with him then and there, or did you connect with him later?
Interesting enough, we didn't connect back then, but of course we talked about it when I joined Qi, and a few people in there have been in the community, and some are still in. I mean, I'm not blaming anyone nobody for anything. I mean, my learning was just that you need to be able to let go of something and then to check your beliefs and also go outside your bubble and understand what are the viable critique points of a project. And I'm not that much into just one project. So right now, my main interest is around Ethereum, the Terra ecosystem, and THORChain. These are definitely my top three. Yeah, but I'm hesitant of all into one project. Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of rich stuff I want to dig into here. First, I want to hear about your relationship with THORChain and getting into THORChain. But then I want to take this opportunity because we talk about that a lot on this show and for obvious reasons, but I want to hear more about your perspective on Terra. Let's start with THORChain for a bit and then we'll transition. Do you remember the first time you heard about THORChain? How did you encounter it? And did you engage with it immediately or did it take a few encounters?
Yeah, as I learned most about both projects is on Twitter. It's a growing hype about THORChain and obviously also the Rune token. It was more than a year ago. I think the price was around 30 cents back then, and it was kind of hovered around at this price range after a huge run. And I looked into it, and it happened something similar that happened to me with Chainlink in 2018. That's where it was a really strong value proposition, right? Native crypto assets cross-chain without a custodian in a decentralized way. That's a huge value proposition, right? It's a huge narrative. And then something I'm still wondering why not more people are talking about it more, because it's revolutionary. It's enabling something that has not been able for years. And we have been all dependent on centralized entities to exchange our tokens and provide our KYC details that's stored in the centralized database. So all those things that are completely against like the nature of cryptocurrencies and also the blockchain technology. And so that's a huge value proposition. And then I dig deeper into what's behind there. What team is building it? Is there an ecosystem around it? Is this just marketing fluff as we see or saw it so often, especially later in 2020? And all these critique points, check marks, they were fine, right? Everything was a sound development behind it, a lot of transparency. I think that THORChain is still the most transparent project out there that I know of in terms of, everything is transparent. Everybody can get involved and everybody can build on it. You can get funded for projects and all of these things that really convinced me. And then obviously I also invested, but I learned more about it. It was not the conviction that I said like, okay, it's all THORChain only, but the conviction got stronger and stronger. And especially now with Qi Captial, where so many are deep into THORChain with you, with Coleslaw, with Johnny and all the others. And now we are building also ourselves on top of THORChain and help to grow the ecosystem now with, for example, taking over the dashboard from Delphi Digital, and we'll announce it pretty soon. Things are getting more and more interesting. And I mean, more than a year ago, I still was like trading on BEP-swap.
Rest in peace, right? BEP-swap.
This now it's finally being shut down, but it was important because like they progressed from single chain chaosnet to multi-chain chaosnet and then towards mainnet. But I think this approach to take it slowly, to cap this cap raise, as much as I hate them, they're really important to have a secure start and be able to have a network that's securing multiple billions in the future.
You touched on so much. There's so many rich threads we can take there, like just this excitement around THORChain that it still feels like just crypto's best kept secret. And, it's not the tiniest project. It's at a 1 point something billion market cap, but it's below SafeMoon right now in its market cap, which I think is just the most hilarious barometer of how much room this thing has to grow.
I mean, there are also some reasons for it, why it's probably not exposed anymore, not talked about it more. Like one thing, and then we've heard many people talk about it, it's still a very complex topic, right? To get involved in it, to use it, to provide liquidity. If there are no caps in place, it's not the easiest thing, right? You have to know a lot of concepts around DeFi and crypto to understand it and to get used to it. You have to know what an AMM is. You have to know what impermanent loss is, how you provide liquidity. You are exposed to Rune and all of these complex topics. And there are now several interfaces and they're getting better by the day to interact with it. And we talk about it a bit later, I guess, what projects are coming up or how existing projects are improving, but it's still for the normie, let's say, or for even the crypto beginners, it's very hard to get into it and use it. But once we have these new projects also sitting on top of THORChain, I think we will see an explosive growth, because like developer proposition is still unique. It's working until now. And so I'm also bullish.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree. Making THORChain more accessible to non-technical, non-crypto savvy audiences. Well, first off, I mean, to be honest, THORChain as the protocol, in the end, it won't have to be accessible itself. People use email every day without knowing about the simple mail transfer protocol. People will get familiar with the interfaces, right? Like without knowing it, they'll be using THORChain to make trades on Trust Wallet, or make trades on Shapeshift, or make trades on Thor Wallet. And Broker Finance and others are going to be abstracting away some of these yield products into very simple interfaces to generate yield based on THORChain primitives. But I still think that there is, and that's part of the mission for Runebase, room to distill these complex topics. And there's people that are doing great work in this field. I think LP University, Grassroots Crypto deserve great shout out. You guys, everybody that's creating content. I think just packaging it in ever simpler ways to really communicate like exactly how powerful like this protocol can be.
But that's so important. I think you're doing God's work here by educating people and then breaking complex topics down. And we see it also in many Discord groups. There are a lot of questions around it, and I think the THORChain community is one of the most helpful in terms of onboarding new users, helping them. You get support from all the different projects, so that's one very important thing. And the second one, and I think it's kicking off, as you said, like you need those interfaces, and we already had some, but now they are kind of exploding. More and more are coming. They're getting more professional. They're also launching their own tokens, which is important right now. I mean, probably have followed what Andre and others have been discussing. Do you need a token? Don't you need one? I think you need one to get this conviction, to have loyalty in the community, and also incentivize them, and then have like a real financial model behind. But that's now just starting, and we will see more and more new projects now building on top of this cross-chain liquidity protocol, and that's incredibly important. And if they have a strong focus on UX and user interface in general, and stripping out this complexity, like all of them strive to, then I think that the future is bright. And the THORChain, like the main OGs, and they are all very heavily supporting these initiatives, and I think that's also important.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the fun things about being in this ecosystem is we get to watch it grow and develop. It's not as crowded right now. Like building in a much more developed ecosystem, it's not as tight of a community. There's so many people doing great things already in the Ethereum ecosystem, and part of like what excites me and what's so fun about the THORChain ecosystem is it's at a size and a stage now where we can connect with the key community members, reach out and connect with the developers and the entrepreneurs, and spin up projects like Runebase and have that actually make a meaningful impact in the community.
Yeah, it's stupid as it sounds, you're still early in THORChain. Yeah,
I know, it's great. I mean, it's crazy. And so talk to me about the involvement that you take in the community, because you're more than just a passive trader or speculator like me. You kind of want to roll up your sleeves and get involved. And so what does your involvement in these communities look like? When you find something that you're interested in, you move with your money, but what else?
Yeah, I think this also changed over the years. I mean, I'm not no trader at all. I would rather qualify myself as an investor with growing conviction about where the space is going to be, and also with more time that I'm able to put into it, like building or creating. This is what interests me, right? You might get into this loophole of just like following what's happening on Twitter and all of these media sources, but really writing stuff, doing podcasts as I'm doing, trying to break things down and explain to others, and then also help projects to grow and to build. I think that's very rewarding, not financially, but also probably financially in the end. That just comes with it. That's something that helps you grow as a person. You learn new skills. And I mean, I have no financial background, and what I've learned over the last years, I'm still not there, but it's really a lot compared to what I've known like a few years ago. So I think that's important. That's also that many people at Qi share, like that we are not just in here to get like the next 10x, 100x, whatever, but to learn ourselves, to educate ourselves, and then to educate others. Or you do one by the other, like by educating others or by trying to understand topics yourself and breaking them down, you learn them even better, right? And so I think that's very important. And then you get, by doing stuff, and this happened to me, by just writing articles, writing reviews, you get a lot of connections. People just approach you. If you can help here, can help there, give advice. And this has been quite a roller coaster ride over the recent months. I'm just starting with this. I think this is also where I want to be professional in the future. And it's a great privilege. Yeah, it's really fun. Yeah.
It's fun. Crypto, for a certain kind of person, many different kinds of people, it can engage in different ways, right? So you can be interested in crypto. Obviously, there's the financial component, right? There's the economic incentive that you might see to get involved in crypto. But beyond that, it's intellectually stimulating. It's philosophically stimulating. You can be politically with it. You could be just as an avocation or for recreation or for community, like for the social aspects. You could be interested in the social good that it does in the world as an inclusive, democratizing force for financial sovereignty and global financial inclusion and access. And if you're the kind of person that's drawn in by one of those or multiple of those topics or aspects, making the transition from just reading about it on Twitter passively to it taking up more of your time to making the transition from like, okay, I'm going to extricate myself from my other job or my other business and start to go full-time in crypto. It's been such a liberation and super fun. So I feel like I'm playing all day, having conversations like this.
Yeah, that's totally true. And as you mentioned, like there's something for everybody in there. What I, for example, find one of the most fascinating aspects of it, it's how global it is. And we live in a nearly completely pseudo-anonymous space here, right? We just know each other with comic avatars, papers, and all of this stuff. And still, you build your credibility and you get to know people. I'm a huge gamer, have been like with MMOs, and obviously played a lot of StarCraft in times back then. So I know this kind of, let's say, virtual reality or alternative reality. So it's not new for me, but it's still fascinating. And you talk with each other on eye level, no matter where they come from, if they're male, female, what's the education, what's the work experience, nobody cares, right? It's just what you do, what you write, what you build, and what you stand for, and how you express yourself. That's what counts. And I think that's very unique to crypto. It also has its downsides, obviously, but that's very fascinating. Also from an organizational or socioeconomic perspective, it's extremely interesting and fascinating.
Absolutely. Where are you creating? Where can people find your writing? Where can people find your podcast?
Yeah, so we have our Medium page with Qi Captial, and then I put all my articles in there, and you can put it in the podcast descriptions. And the Qi podcast is also on Apple, Spotify, and we'll share the link after.
And that's QI. Qi is spelled QI. What do you write about? What do you podcast about? What will people find when they listen or read your work?
Two kinds of topics. The one is really educational stuff, something really basic like crypto security or how does an AMM work, how to provide liquidity and all of this stuff. And then I dig deeper into projects that I find interesting myself. And then as I mentioned in the beginning, Qi is mostly centered around Ethereum, Terra, and THORChain. So this is also where we create most of the content, sometimes diving into specific other projects. We did, for example, a lot about the Terra ecosystem because many of us find it very interesting, and there's been a lot happening. It's probably at a growth status where the THORChain may soon be, where you see an explosive growth of community-led projects and new initiatives. So that's extremely interesting to see that, because like Terra 1 year ago, it was mainly about what happened in South Korea and the retail integration of the Qi app, if you're familiar with that. And then the first protocol started with Anchored Mirror, and now suddenly we see dozens of projects starting, also with the help of incubators like Alpha Digital. And so that's also where we produce quite a lot of content about. But yeah, second is probably THORChain in terms of content that we put out and people we have on the show, also on in the podcast. And we had our first strategic initiative in a strategic investment with THORstarter, so Qi Captial and THORstarter. And yeah, you are also involved there, so you know that. Very interesting project, fascinating. Also helping to get new project launched on THORChain, and we see now a strong interaction and collaborations between all of these projects. Like we see just recently, a few minutes ago, like THORStarter and Porker, they announced their collaboration. THORSwap is also working with all of those, XDeFi and others. So that's something we would like to cover and break down the specifics of these projects. And then I'm just shitposting out on Twitter.
You got to shitpost on Twitter. That's like the necessary ticket to entry here. I didn't know that THORStarter just announced their broker partnership. Did that just happen today?
Yeah, an hour ago, I think.
So we launched Runebase News, and the idea was to cover developments in the THORChain ecosystem, like kind of as they happen. And it's happening so fast. And it's just, like some of the things that have been announced, THORStarter and the broker announcements, Thor Wallet just announced their roadmap. Like they had their introductory blog post and they announced their roadmap and timeline to token sale in October. BEP-swap is being deprecated, and THORSwap and Skip Exchange teased new interface updates. And I'm sure I'm forgetting something.
Station Finance is also a pretty new project on THORChain. They revealed themselves a few days ago. Yeah.
There's just so much going on. So if anybody listening is interested in becoming a Runebase News contributor, and you can earn a little bit of Rune for every news post that you make, of which, of course, there's plenty as we're talking about, feel free to reach out. You can go to runebase.org/contribute. Little shameless self-plug there. But awesome. So, okay, getting involved in crypto, your podcast, the work that you're writing is all available at Qi Captial. And a lot of that covers the Terra ecosystem. THORChain is the second most, and then Ethereum as well.
But perhaps let's talk a bit about those projects that you just teased.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to get to next. So here, I'm a Terra noob. I've heard so much about it from the overlap in the THORChain ecosystem. Sell me on Terra, like just full shill.
I will just repeat how I got sold on Terra. And I mentioned a year ago, and I just saw like the traction they are getting in South Korea by really plugging into the retail system there and then enable payments via the Qi app, which more than 2 million people are using right now. And all payments are routed through the Terra native stablecoins. So a huge adoption, huge traction. They're really always trying to make the connection with real world. In this case, it was real world payments. I think that's very important, and it gets lost very often. You see a lot of projects that are only in this crypto bubble, but the connection to real world adoption and people not even knowing that they're using crypto or blockchain technology in the background, I think that's important. And Terra understood it very well. And those native stablecoins, I mean, they're algorithmic stablecoins, right? Backed by Luna, and with increasing and decreasing supply of Luna, you get the UST stablecoin, and you have the Korean variant, you have Euro and Swiss francs and others. They work very well. Even during the recent drawdowns, they quickly at least got back to the bag. And I think to have a really decentralized stablecoin, it's incredibly important. I mean, you see the volumes of stablecoins with USDT and USDC and others, and they're also always very centralized, sometimes more, sometimes less trustworthy. And we have yet to see another algorithmic stablecoin besides UST that really works. And for now, UST is a good model, and that was something that really struck me back then. And I think this narrative is only getting stronger over the recent weeks, that you have this decentralized stablecoin. Yeah.
Real quick, would you say that DAI hasn't worked well as an algorithmic stablecoin?
I mean, look at what DAI is now backed by. It's mostly USDC in the background.
Really? Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah. So that's a big difference here. And there are a lot of very interesting experiments in terms of algorithmic stablecoins, and a lot of Qi Captial people are behind and haven't digged deeper into that one. But there are others, like there's Float and seen the Phi, Y and others. But they're all experiments. And they're mainly lacking also the transaction flow in the background. That's something that Terra managed very well. The third thing is now this explosive growth of projects that are happening. Projects that are really incubated by professionals, by IDO labs, by Delphi Digital. And so we have the base primitives of lending, of market makers, of AMMs that are already existing or coming to this space, plus a few more innovative others. Obviously, you have THORChain as the charismatic leader, which is for one thing important, for another thing also a risk. He's pushing the space extremely well right now.
I want to talk about the explosive growth of projects, but I want to come back to stablecoins and just circle back, if I can, the significance of algorithmic stablecoins versus the alternative to algorithmic stablecoins. USD DAI at least started its life as an algorithmic stablecoin. Can you talk a bit about why algorithmic stablecoins are important versus the alternative? What is the alternative, and why are algorithmic stablecoins preferable?
I mean, it's again about centralization and decentralization. For a centralized stablecoin, you still need to trust an entity. I mean, probably relatively easy to trust Circle in this case. It's probably less easy to trust Tether and the others too. That's again about trust. And then the decentralized algorithmic stablecoin, it's managed by expansion and contraction of a decentralized asset in the background. And I think that's something that's incredibly important for decentralized finance to fulfill its vision.
It's interesting. So DAI, we mentioned earlier, was one of the first quote unquote decentralized algorithmic stablecoins. And it was actually one of the first meaningful projects in Ethereum as well.
It was probably the first.
You mentioned something to me I didn't know, that DAI is majority backed by USDC now. Can you talk about what that means, what the implications of that are? First off, what does it mean for one stablecoin to be backed by other assets? And then what are the implications of the majority of that backing asset being USDC?
Yeah, it means originally DAI was backed by Ethereum only, right? And over time, like additional collateral has been allowed, and now USDC makes up for more than 60% of the collateral behind DAI. So if USDC fails for whatever reason, even if it's very unlikely, it's still really much dependent on this. And it's very different to how it originally started. There are many people that are much more knowledgeable about this topic, about DAI. But still, if you look really for decentralized stablecoin alternative, there are not so many out there that have huge volume adoption.
Yeah. Another thing that's interesting about USDC is that it's centrally controlled and issued and controlled by Circle and Coinbase, if I understand correctly. And they built into the USDC contract, they actually have the power to rescind USDC or to remove it from accounts or to freeze it inside accounts, as they need to, I think, because they are both US regulated issuers. And so I think the same might be true for USDT. And so they're censorable, they're stoppable. And that's actually...
Yeah, you see the problem now, right? I mean, it has its advantages, right? If you have a hack, they're able to freeze a certain account that has been identified, definitely a good thing. But yeah, if you want to have it decentralized, then that's a no-go.
There's another interesting layer to this. And this is where like intellectually or politically or philosophically someone can become engaged with crypto. And what I'm about to say is going to be antithetical to, I think, the kind of like classic crypto libertarian kind of line. But there's this reality, the real politic of the US's political dominance in the world. A lot of that is strengthened and empowered by the US holding and controlling the US dollar, which is the global reserve currency. And that is a weapon that it wields in this global geopolitical fight against adversaries. US does have genuine enemies, and it also, so it can wield the US dollar and the financial ecosystem that revolves around it as a weapon. And so there are things like sanctions. Sanctions are a weapon that the US employs on its enemies. And there are bad actors that the US goes up against and that probably should not be funded. We don't want these groups funded. But the problem is that we place that power and that trust in bureaucrats and politicians, and it's never wielded perfectly. There's always instances where that power is abused, and we cannot take for granted, and we can't take for granted, and certainly going into the future, that power can corrupt. And so what's happening here is one of America's strongest weapons is being eroded. And so as we root for the rise of cryptocurrencies and the rise of algorithmic stablecoins and possibly unseating the dollar as a global reserve currency, maybe years or decades down the line, that's actually for the American government, I should say, that for their power and their control, it's actually a degradation, but that's not an entirely bad thing for the citizens of the world to depoliticize money and to deleverage a single governmental regime from having that level of control. So there's a gray area there. It's not black and white, but I think it's fascinating to explore.
I mean, it's a very philosophical topic. And you mean over the last hundreds of years, we have seen several dominant world currencies in the past, always issued by the most powerful country back then, be it the Netherlands, be it the United Kingdom, be it now the United States. And we have always seen a change coming. The question is now, will it be another country like China filling this role in the mid to far future, or will it be finally some kind of decentralized currency, or will we see a completely different system, not having one dominant currency? But yes, of course, like it's a huge tool of power that the US knows very well how to play with it and how to use it to the disadvantage of many other countries, obviously. Yeah. But I'm not in the US. A change coming.
Yeah. I love the US and I love America, but I'm also, I'm Vietnamese American, and I lived in Vietnam for most of the last 6 years, and I see that it's unlike a lot of, I don't know what to call it, like nationalists. Like I see that it's not the center of the world, that there's great people everywhere, and that there's great countries everywhere, and that the US has its flaws and its faults. And particularly the US government. I would say the US system, the US government has its flaws and faults. And it's great to see that there are alternative financial systems that are focused. The US government also has its many interests, and those interests don't include global inclusive access for developing countries and impoverished communities all around the world. And so now, for the first time, through cryptocurrencies, through decentralized financial services and stablecoins, these otherwise disenfranchised populations have access to world-class financial products, currencies, investment opportunities, and more. And so that's, I think, the first thing I say when I talk about the value of cryptocurrencies to people who might not be believers yet.
But it's still like interesting, or kind of a paradox, that we always talk about the stablecoin and then 99% of them are pegged to the US dollar. It's a kind of really strange. I think like the perfect stablecoin would either follow like a lagging indicator of the crypto market itself, or like several dominant currencies, or even broader, follow like the economic growth worldwide. Interesting that we haven't really seen something that goes into that direction, but this actually should be like the ultimate goal, to have a stable coin that's not pegged to one dominant currency.
After our recent tangent here, I did want to come back to that, which is, we have UST, we have DAI, we have all these algorithmic and otherwise pegged stable assets, but they're all seem to reconcile to the US dollar. Is Ohm, I don't know if Ohm purports to have a value-based, and then I know MahaDAO I've heard of is a project that's working to do a price basket.
Yeah, also a float, for example, it started with like 1.6 something US dollar, but it's also following like the price development of even not being like pegged to one conversion rate to the US dollar. So there are a few starting with it, but having something really broadly packed of different assets. Yeah, we haven't really seen that.
Cool. I think we have a few minutes left here. Or actually, I guess we have a hard stop here in 4 or 5 minutes. Let's see. I don't know if we have enough time to cover this fully, but looping back to Terra, what would you, and this is obviously not financial advice, but for a newcomer interested in getting involved in the Terra ecosystem, first, what resources would you recommend to learn more? I don't know if you have anything that you've created, or if there's any like go-to websites or videos that you've watched. So first is resources. And second would be I know that there's a few projects. There's Terra and the Luna token itself, but then there's also Anchor and Mirror and others. What would you recommend in terms of investigating for potential routes for exposure to this growth?
One, we have quite a lot of articles also for beginners that explore how Terra works and how the most important protocols on top of it works at the G Medium blog. And then, for example, there's the Terra Bytes podcast. There's also something I would recommend. And also, like Delphi put out several research articles around the Terra ecosystem, and yeah, of course, following like the project and Do on Twitter, like this generates probably the most amount of alpha. But something I would always recommend, it's not dependent on Terra or one specific ecosystem, is to just like try things out. this is also how I learned it, like dozens of DeFi projects that are really used and experimented over the last couple of years and months. And this learns really a lot, like just explore stuff, try it out, use the interface, follow the projects on Discord. And this generates so much more learning and critical questions in the end. And that's the most benefiting. But of course, start out with an article and then head into know the risks that you're exposed to, try it with a small amount of money. And for Terra, I think there are these fundamental protocols that are really the core anchor pieces of Terra, like besides the stablecoins, and that's definitely anchor as the borrowing lending protocol that gives you a fixed savings rate of currently 20%. So you can just put in your Luna and soon like ETH and DOT and SOL as collateral and then borrow around it, or your deposit USD and then get this 20%. So that's a cornerstone. And now we see like Mars protocol being the lending protocol in the future, the money market. And just as support, the new AMM was announced a few weeks ago. That will also be very interesting. It will follow the Terra swap and be like kind of Terra swap version 2. Yeah, but follow us on Twitter. We talk about all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's us as Twitter at Qi Captial, QI, I think it's _Capital. And then your handle is Archon0x, is that right?
Archon _0x, yes.
Okay, so at ARCHON _0x. Is there anything else that you'd point our listeners to if they want to keep up with you? Twitter, anything else? Podcast?
No, I think I would also follow like the THORChain projects that we not talked very quickly about. Probably we should do a second episode, dive deep into each of them. I think that's very interesting. You also get like other people on board, like with THORSwap, THORStarter, THORWallet, Porker, XDeFi, Station Finance. So it's still a good time to get involved with those projects, with THORChain. It's still a space where you can get hold of everything that's going on. I mean, it's already difficult, but it's still manageable, right? In Ethereum, for example, you cannot, even if you spend your whole day researching and looking at stuff, it's impossible to cover everything, right? You need to find a niche in Ethereum. It's about like you're focusing on DEX or on lending or on derivatives or fixed interest, whatever. NFTs, even one part of this would probably fill your day. And with THORChain, you still have the advantage that right now you can kind of get an overview about what's happening without getting completely overwhelmed.
Yeah. And some of that might be also, even forward looking, a year from now. Well, it's hard to say, but, THORChain isn't a featureless L1 platform that you can build anything off of, right? It is a platform with a very specific set of features, and a lot is enabled by that. I mean, the biggest feature is the deep liquidity pools of different assets, and then all the things that you can build on top of that. Swapping is just one feature, and then pull back synthetic assets, pull back stablecoins, and then we're seeing derivatives, and we're seeing robo-advisor type investment applications. But it doesn't seem to me, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think we'll see? I don't think we'll see an Ethereum style Cambrian explosion.
But this is something I like about THORChain, because like it's very clear what it is about and what it's not about, right? You mentioned those, like it's the cross-chain liquidity and things you can build on top of it, yeah. And like Station Finance also like being an aggregator of derivatives protocols and utilizing THORChain for it. But it's not a smart contract platform. You cannot issue your token on top of THORChain and all of this stuff, where people like, let's take Cardano, that dream about every use case there is out in the world that has something to do with blockchain, and then you can perhaps use it someday on top of it.
We'll just write a lot about it and talk a lot about it, and then one day you'll be able to use it.
Or being an Ethereum killer, that's not about. It has a clear use case, and it has a clear value proposition and what you can do with it. And then, I think that's a huge advantage, not a disadvantage.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also an advantage for us because it keeps us sane, because we don't have to keep up with this Cambrian explosion. We can just as much as possible, just focus. I mean, I know for you, you're focused on a few different ecosystems. It sounds like you do, dip your toes in Ethereum and Terra as well, or maybe more than just your toes. But I mean, for me at least, just having this almost tunnel vision like focus on THORChain has been part of what's kept me sane. I don't check prices really, and I focus on one ecosystem. And I am starting to diversify my investments, so it's not just full exposure to just one layer. But in terms of my passion and my deep dive interest, I'm really building a lot around the THORChain ecosystem. So it kind of helps to have that focus.
I think it's really good to focus yourself, and I think since 2019, it's also the only way to go to focus at least in a couple of projects or ecosystems. Otherwise, you will just go nuts and follow each trend that's popping up somewhere. Then you end up with nothing. You don't know about every single project, and then you have a list of 20, 30 assets you're invested in, and then you're getting crazy of trying to keeping up what's going on there, and you cannot build up the conviction that it's sometimes needed, especially with those bear markets in between. You would just get weekends for good reason, because you don't know enough about it, and you don't see what's happening from the perspective of the team, of development, and so on. And then you would just let go, and sometimes that turns out bad in the end.
Absolutely. That's a great place to leave it. I think that maybe that's my selfish motivation in all of this, is to just keep re-upping on that conviction. And also, I mean, let's be real, like we talked about earlier, I'm just having so much fun focusing on this ecosystem and connecting with people like you. So Archon, thank you so much for taking the time. This conversation has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure for me too. Hope we hear each other again. Talk more. It was really great fun.
Yeah, let's do it. We'll make you a friend of the podcast. And I look forward to the next episodes of the Qi Captial podcast and the work that you're doing on the Qi Captial blog. Thank you for everything that you're putting out. And we will talk to you again soon.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bye.